This is Land of Havilah, Jeremiah 49. The first 8 verses are a prophecy of war coming to Ammon. Ammon was the nation east of the Jordan River. Their capital was Rabbah, 42 miles east of Jerusalem. Today, Rabbah is Amman, Jordan, bearing the name of the Ammonites who used to live there. Verse 1. Of the children of Ammon, Yahweh says, Has Israel no sons? Has he no heir? Why then does Malcolm possess Gad, and his people dwell in its cities? Comment in verse 1, Malcolm or Milcom was the principal god of the Ammonites. 1 Kings 11:5. Yahweh asks, why does Malcolm possess Gad? Gad is the land east of the Jordan River that used to be the territory of the Yahweh-worshipping Israelite tribe of Gad, but now the Malcolm-worshipping Ammonites have it. Yahweh says, the land belongs to me. Leviticus 25:23. Thus the question, why does Malcolm have it? Yahweh is jealous for his people to possess it again. Verse 2. Therefore, behold, the days come, says Yahweh, that I will cause an alarm of war to be heard against Rabbah of the children of Ammon, and it will become a desolate heap, and her daughters will be burned with fire. Then Israel will possess those who possessed him, says Yahweh. Comment in verse 2, since the land rightfully belongs to Yahweh, he'll make war against the Ammonites and take it back as a possession of Israel. He'll desolate their capital, Rabbah, and burn all the smaller towns, which here he calls Rabbah's daughters. Verse 3. Wail, Heshbon, for Ai is laid waste. Cry, you daughters of Rabbah. Clothe yourself in sackcloth. Lament and run back and forth among the fences, for Malcolm will go into captivity, his priests and his princes together. Comment in verse 2, the cities of Heshbon and Ai were near Ammon. In the times of Moses and Joshua, Yahweh destroyed those cities and gave them to Israel. That was a prelude to what he'll do to the Ammonites in this future war. The Ammonite displacement will be just as stunning. Speaking of Ammon, verse 4. Why do you boast in the valleys, your flowing valley, backsliding daughter? You trusted in her treasures, saying, who will come to me? Behold, I will bring a terror on you, says the Lord, Yahweh of armies, from all who are around you. All of you will be driven completely out, and there will be no one to gather together the fugitives. Comment in verse 4, the Ammonites are confident no one will come there to make war. But in verse 5, terror is coming from all who are around her. The Ammonites will be completely driven out. As to fulfillment of this war, in chapter 25, verse 9, Yahweh said Nebuchadnezzar was his agent, and in chapter 27 that the king of Ammon should serve Nebuchadnezzar willingly, or Nebuchadnezzar would destroy his nation and take them captive. Probably it came to pass that Ammon resisted and Nebuchadnezzar made war, but the documentation of it is lacking. Assuming Nebuchadnezzar did desolate Rabbah and burn all the smaller towns, that wouldn't be a completely satisfying fulfillment, because verse 2 says Israel would take possession. Your narrator is putting this prophecy in the wait-and-see category. Now one last line regarding Ammon, verse 6. But afterward I will reverse the captivity of the children of Ammon, says Yahweh. Comment verse 6 caps off this prophecy and echoes Jeremiah 48:47 concerning Moab and Jeremiah 49:39 concerning Elam, that Yahweh will reverse the captivity of those nations in the latter days. We're getting an end-time vibe here that fulfillments are still in the future, and that God will always spare a remnant of every nation to be redeemed. Going on now to a prophecy concerning the nation Edom, which was south of the Dead Sea, verse 7. Of Edom, Yahweh of armies says, is wisdom no more in Teman? Has counsel perished from the prudent? Has their wisdom vanished? Flee, turn back, dwell in the depths, inhabitants of Dedan, for I'll bring the calamity of Esau on him when I visit him. Comment in verses 7 and 8, Teman and Dedan are parts of Edom, Genesis 36:11 and Ezekiel 25:13. Yahweh asks, has their wisdom vanished? What are they thinking? Edom was one of the nations on Jeremiah's list in chapter 27 that should surrender to Nebuchadnezzar. Apparently they did, because in Obadiah 1:11 and Psalm 137:7, the Edomites allied themselves with the Babylonians in the siege against Jerusalem and were very enthusiastic about it. They said, raise it, even to the foundation. That's probably what Yahweh was alluding to in verse 7 when he asked, has their wisdom vanished. In verse 8, somehow Yahweh will visit them with calamity and terror. They'll turn back and flee. Still regarding Edom, verse 9. If grape gatherers came to you, would they not leave some gleaning grapes? If thieves came by night, wouldn't they steal until they had enough? But I've made Esau bare. I've uncovered his secret places, and he'll not be able to hide himself. His offspring is destroyed with his brothers and his neighbors, and he is no more. Leave your fatherless children. I'll preserve them alive. Let your widows trust in me. Comment in verses 9 and 10, the grape gatherers always miss a few, and a thief in the night doesn't usually take everything. So how unusual that Yahweh will take every man of Edom. In verse 11, it's not an end of Edom, only of their men, because Yahweh will preserve their widows and children. They'll be taken captive, coming later in the passage. Verse 12. For Yahweh says, Behold, they to whom it didn't pertain to drink the cup will certainly drink, and are you he who will altogether go unpunished? You won't go unpunished, but you'll surely drink. Comment in verse 12, Edom hasn't drunk the cup of suffering. So far, it's something that never pertained to them, but certainly they will drink it. Verse 13, For I have sworn by myself, says Yahweh, that Bozrah will become an astonishment, a reproach, a waste, and a curse. All its cities will be perpetual wastes. Comment in verse 13, Yahweh will make an astonishing perpetual wasteland of all Edom's cities. Today the area is very lightly inhabited. Verse 14, I have heard news from Yahweh, and an ambassador is sent among the nations, saying, Gather yourselves together, come against her, rise up to the battle. For behold, I have made you small among the nations and despised among men. Comment in verse 14, Yahweh will send an ambassador among the nations, telling them to gather against Edom to make war. It's probably the coalition that was with Nebuchadnezzar. In verse 15, Yahweh has caused Edom to be small and despised. It's a vulnerable combination. Coming up, Edom suffers from a delusion that they're strong enough to terrorize the other nations. Verse 16. As for your terror, the pride of your heart has deceived you. O you who dwell in the clefts of the rock, who hold the height of the hill, though you should make your nest as high as the eagle, I will bring you down from there, says Yahweh. Comment in verse 16, Edom has a mountain range that runs north to south about 80 miles and east to west about 10 miles. The Edomites use the rock formations of the mountains as military strongholds. But though they make their nest as high as an eagle, Yahweh will bring them down from there. Verse 17. Edom will become an astonishment. Everyone who passes by it will be astonished and will hiss at all its plagues. As in the overthrow of Sodom and Gomorrah and its neighbor cities, says Yahweh, no man will dwell there, neither will any son of man live therein. Behold, he'll come up like a lion from the pride of the Jordan against the strong habitation. For I'll suddenly make them run away from it, and whoever is chosen, I will appoint him over it. For who is like me? Who will appoint me a time? Who is the shepherd who will stand before me? Comment in verse 17, Yahweh will destroy Edom to an astonishing extent. In verse 18, no man will dwell there. In verse 19, Edom will come up like a lion on the attack against a strong habitation. Edom's attack will be disastrous because Yahweh will make them suddenly run. Then Yahweh will appoint over Edom the man of his choice. In answer to Yahweh's questions at the end of verse 19, no one is like him. He doesn't let anyone schedule his appointments, and there is no shepherd, man, or God who can stand before him. The obvious corollary is that he's able to fulfill this prophecy against Edom. Verse 20. Therefore hear the counsel of Yahweh that he has taken against Edom, and his purposes that he has purposed against the inhabitants of Teman. Surely they will drag them away, the little ones of the flock. Surely he'll make their habitation desolate over them. Comment in verse 20, and previously, surely Yahweh has purposed that Edom's men will be killed and little ones of the flock dragged away, meaning the children and widows will be taken captive, leaving the land desolate. Verse 21. The earth trembles at the noise of their fall. There is a cry, the noise which is heard in the Red Sea. Behold, he'll come up and fly as the eagle and spread out his wings against Bozrah. The heart of the mighty men of Edom at that day will be as the heart of a woman in her pangs. Comment in verse 21, the earth trembles. It'll be an earth-shaking event, so to speak. The noise will be heard in the Red Sea. The Red Sea is just south of Edom. In verse 22, Yahweh will swoop down like an eagle against Basra, the capital of Edom. The hearts of the mighty men will fail for distress, like the hearts of women in labor. Coming up, Damascus is the subject. Yahweh will judge that Syrian city 140 miles north of Jerusalem. Verse 23. Of Damascus, Hamath is confounded, and Arpad, for they have heard evil news. They have melted away. There's sorrow on the sea. It can't be quiet. Comment in verse 23, disturbing and sorrowful news has gone out from Damascus to their fellow Syrians in Hamath Arpad along the Mediterranean coast, and the news even travels by sea. It's a most newsworthy event. Verse 24. Damascus has grown feeble. She turns herself to flee, and trembling has seized her. Anguish and sorrows have taken hold of her, as of a woman in travail. How is the city of praise not forsaken, the city of my joy? Therefore her young men will fall in her streets, and all the men of war will be brought to silence in that day, says Yahweh of armies. I'll kindle a fire in the wall of Damascus, and it will devour the palaces of Ben-Hadad. Comment in verses 24 to 27, it turns out that the disturbing news from Damascus is that the city has been overthrown. In verse 25, how is it that the city wasn't forsaken? In other words, why didn't her citizens escape beforehand? And since they didn't, in verse 26, all her young men and men of war will fall in the streets. In verse 27, the city will be burned along with the historic palaces built by King Ben-Hadad about 200 years previously. Probably Nebuchadnezzar was the fulfillment. He laid siege to Damascus in 605 and conquered it. It was in the middle of Jeremiah's ministry. No details are available as to the casualties or the burning. Coming up, there will be judgment on Kedar and Hazor, two unrelated peoples. Kedar descended from Ishmael, Genesis 25:13, and they were desert dwellers, Isaiah 42:11, living in tents, Psalm 120, verse 5. As far as Hazor, it was a northern Canaanite city whose king rallied all the kingdoms around him to resist Joshua, but Joshua destroyed them in one battle, Joshua chapter 11. Hazor bounced back and was eventually carried away captive by Assyria, 2 Kings 15:29. As of Jeremiah's time coming up, the small kingdoms of the area go by the collective name Hazor. Since these two unrelated people are being treated in this chapter as a group, it could be that when the Assyrians deported Hazor, the nomadic Kedarites came in to fill the void. In other words, Hazor is now occupied by Kedar. Verse 28. Of Kedar and of the kingdoms of Hazor, which Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon struck, Yahweh says, arise, go up to Kedar and destroy the children of the east. They will take their tents and their flocks. They will carry away for themselves their curtains, all their vessels and their camels, and they'll cry to them terror on every side. Comment in verses 28 and 29, Nebuchadnezzar struck Kedar and Hazor, or in trying to explain how this could be one event, he struck Kedar at Hazor. Concerning Hazor and Kedar, verse 30, flee, wander far off, dwell in the depths, you inhabitants of Hazor, says Yahweh, for Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon has taken counsel against you and has conceived a purpose against you. Arise, go up to a nation that is at ease, that dwells without care, says Yahweh, that has neither gates nor bars, that dwells alone. Comment in verse 31, the inhabitants don't have gates or bars. In other words, they don't have any walled, fortified cities. Nebuchadnezzar has decided to attack them. Verse 32, their camels will be a booty, and the multitude of their livestock a plunder. I'll scatter to all winds those who have the corners of their beards cut off, and I'll bring their calamity from every side of them, says Yahweh. Hazor will be a dwelling place of jackals, a desolation forever. No man will dwell there, neither will any son of man live therein. Comment in verse 32, only Gentiles trim the edges of their beards. Israelites didn't because there was a law against it, Leviticus 19:27. Thus Gentiles looked obviously foreign to Israelites and vice versa. In verse 32, Yahweh will scatter all those who have the corners of their beards cut off. He'll scatter the Gentiles, in this case, Kedar and Hazor. Now 6 verses to round out the chapter, a judgment on Elam. Elam was 1,000 miles away in southwestern Persia, much more distant than any of the countries mentioned so far. They were just east of Nebuchadnezzar's home base. He conquered them between 600 and 595 BC. Verse 34. Yahweh's word that came to Jeremiah the prophet concerning Elam in the beginning of the reign of Zedekiah king of Judah, saying, Yahweh of armies says, Behold, I'll break the bow of Elam, the chief of their might. I'll bring on Elam the 4 winds from the 4 quarters of the sky, and will scatter them toward all those winds. There will be no nation where the outcasts of Elam will not come. I'll cause Elam to be dismayed before their enemies and before those who seek their life. I'll bring evil on them, even my fierce anger, says Yahweh, and I'll send the sword after them until I have consumed them. I'll set my throne in Elam and will destroy from there kings and princes, says Yahweh. But it will happen in the latter days that I'll reverse the captivity of Elam, says Yahweh. Comment: the fulfillment of verses 34 to 39 seems clear in that, as we said, Nebuchadnezzar conquered Elam about 600 to 595. In verse 34, Jeremiah prophesied it in the beginning of the reign of Zedekiah, which was 597. In verse 35, Yahweh will break Elam's bow, meaning their military power. In verses 36 to 37, Yahweh will scatter the Elamites to the 4 winds. Even then, he'll send the sword after them until he's consumed them. In verse 38, Yahweh will set his throne in Elam. This was fulfilled when the Medes and Persians, with Elam as one of their home bases, conquered the Middle East and set one of their capitals in Susa of Elam. It was perhaps their main capital from the impression we get in the book of Esther. In Daniel 2:21, Yahweh removes kings and sets up kings. In Proverbs 21:1, a king's heart is like a stream of water in Yahweh's hands. He turns it where he will. So from the throne of the kingdom of the Medes and Persians in Susa of Elam, Yahweh ruled the Middle East as he said he would in verse 38, that he would set his throne in Elam. This was fulfilled about 50 years after Jeremiah, when the Elamites rose from the dust as a key part of that new empire, turned the tables on the Babylonians, and took the Middle East for themselves. In verse 38, Yahweh will destroy from there kings and princes. With Susa of Elam being one of the capitals of the new empire, the Medes and Persians conquered from the Indus River Valley to Ethiopia. Thus Yahweh's throne over all those nations was in Elam as he said it would be. Jeremiah called it 50 years in advance. Jeremiah 50 is next.